What happens when the most expensive military in history meets a weapon it can destroy, but cannot afford to keep destroying? The year is 2026. You're staring at a radar screen somewhere in the Persian Gulf, and there's a blip on it that shouldn't matter. It's slow, it's small. Any first-year analyst would tell you to ignore it because it's flying at the speed of a lawnmower and it shows up on radar like a large bird. Except it's not a bird. It's a drone that costs less than a used car to build, and the system built to stop it costs more than most people's houses. You fire the interceptor anyway because that's the only tool you've got, and somewhere in that exchange, one machine that cost $20,000 just made another machine that costs $4 million completely irrelevant. Nobody's declaring a winner yet. This isn't the part where Iran wins and America loses. This is just the moment you notice something is wrong with the picture. The most expensive military machine humans have ever built has encountered a problem it cannot simply outspend. So is this just another expensive war, or is Iran the place where American power finally runs out of answers? So let's start with the drone, not because it's the weapon that won the war, but because it's the easiest place to see the trap beginning to close. It's called the Shahed. Iran didn't design some exotic piece of aerospace engineering to make it. They used commercial parts, the kind of stuff you can find in a hobby shop or order off a supplier's catalogue, and they built the whole thing for roughly $20,000. Now put that next to what the US and Israel had to use to stop it. Interceptor missiles. Each one of those runs somewhere between $1 million and $4 million. You are spending millions of dollars to destroy something that costs thousands. That's not a rounding error, that's not a bad week. That's a system where every exchange, every intercept, every successful defense actually loses money by a factor of 100 to 1. Do that a few hundred times and the arithmetic starts to collapse on its own. And that's just the first layer of the trap, but cost asymmetry alone doesn't explain why the most powerful military on Earth couldn't adapt. For that, you need to understand what the drones were actually clearing the way for. They were the opening move in something built in 3 waves. First, Iran sent the slow, cheap Shaheds hours ahead of everything else, not to do damage, but to force American and Israeli crews to empty their launch tubes, firing at targets that barely mattered. Then came the cruise missiles, faster, harder to track, hitting while those launch tubes were still reloading. And only then, once the defenses were fully occupied and stretched thin, did Iran fire its own ballistic missiles, weapons built entirely at home that Western intelligence didn't even know existed. Think of any air defense system as a bucket. It doesn't matter how good the bucket is. It doesn't matter if you can jam every frequency in the sky. If the water comes faster than it drains, the bucket overflows. Iran figured out how to overflow the bucket for pennies on the dollar, wave after wave, until the arithmetic collapsed on its own. Add it up, and here's what it looked like on the ground. Over 200 targets hit across multiple countries. US personnel evacuating bases in the middle of the night. So here's the question that actually matters, the one nobody on the Joint Chiefs wanted to touch. If you know the drones are coming, if you know the pattern, why can't you just build a counter for it? The answer has nothing to do with better radar or faster missiles. It has to do with where the thing you're trying to stop actually lives and how many copies of it there are. You can't fix it with a smarter interceptor, not with more missiles in the tube, not with anything sitting in a hangar in Nevada, because the machine you're trying to stop wasn't built last year. It was built over 40 years, starting in the 1980s, when Iran watched Scud missiles fall on its own cities with nothing to answer back. A man named Hassan Trani Mogadam decided that would never happen again, and every decision he made after that was designed to survive the exact kind of war being fought against it now. That's why you can't bomb your way back to good math. So here's the question Mogadam was really answering. Not how do we build a missile, but how do you build something that keeps fighting when the other side has already spent its way past rational? In 1984, he took 13 men to Syria to learn Soviet rocketry from scratch, starting with almost nothing. No factories, no blueprints of their own, just 13 guys and a notebook full of borrowed knowledge. That's the seed. Everything that landed on a radar screen in 2026 traces back to that trip. What grew out of it isn't a missile program the way you'd picture one. It's cities. Underground, carved hundreds of meters beneath actual mountains. Concrete tunnels that don't just store weapons but build them. Self-contained factories running assembly lines a satellite can't see because there's a mountain sitting on top of the roof. You can photograph the surface all day and find nothing because there's nothing up there to find. The war is happening underneath the picture you're looking at. In 2025, Israel killed the man running it all, an airstrike, a direct hit, the kind of operation that's supposed to end a war on the spot. And for about a day, it probably felt like it worked. Then the tunnels kept building, the provinces kept launching. Nothing about the machine actually stopped. Iran didn't build one command center, they built 31. Separate provincial commands, each one able to keep launching, keep building, keep operating completely on its own. Most militaries have a head. Cut it off and the body stops moving. This one doesn't have a head. It has 31 spines, and every one of them can walk on its own. They killed the man, they thought they'd killed the network, and they fundamentally misunderstood what he'd built. All of that meant you didn't just lose every exchange, you began losing the capacity to keep exchanging on your own terms. This is the part where the empire should have realized something was wrong. It had spent 40 years building a military that assumed it would always face one enemy at a time, in one place, with weapons it could outspend. Iran had just proven that war had changed into something the empire wasn't built to fight. So if the system wasn't built simply to survive, what was all that survivability designed to protect? Those 13 men went to Syria in 1984 with nothing but notebooks and borrowed knowledge, and they didn't just build a missile, they built a way to turn geography into leverage. Look at a map. Look at where Iran actually sits. It sits right on top of the Strait of Hormuz, a stretch of water so narrow you could see across it on a clear day. 20% of the entire planet's oil moves through that one channel. 25% of its liquefied natural gas moves through it too. There's no detour, there's no back road. Every tanker headed anywhere that matters has to pass through that exact strip of water, and Iran controls one whole side of it. So they shut it down. Not for a day, not for a week as a show of force, they shut it down for close to 4 months. And the number that came out of that shutdown should stop you cold. 1.15 billion barrels of oil pulled off the global market. Not delayed, not rerouted, gone, unsold, unmoved, while the world's economy sat there waiting for tankers that weren't coming. This is where you get to hear it in Trump's own words, and I'm not going to dress it up because it doesn't need it. If we keep arming, those ships won't be going. And you're talking about $500, $600, $700 million a day. Also, we run out of reserves in about 4 weeks. You know, there are reserves all over the world, and we would really run out. The President of the United States, on camera, admitting the country was roughly a month away from running dry. Not a think tank, not a leaked memo, the man himself, saying it out loud. But the strait wasn't just an oil problem. Every barrel that moved through it moved through a system built on one single assumption. And if that channel stopped, the assumption stopped working. And that's when the question changes. Not can we win this war, but what's actually holding the empire up when the guns stop working? So somewhere in Washington, somebody finally does the math. Not the generals, the people above the generals. The ones who look at 4 weeks of oil reserves and 31 command centers you can't decapitate and realize this isn't a war you win. It's a war you stop as fast and as quietly as you possibly can. That raises a question nobody in Washington wanted to hear out loud. Can you keep paying for an empire if the thing the war is killing is the very machinery the empire runs on? Which raises a second question nobody in Tel Aviv wanted to hear either. What does Washington have to give up to make that happen? That's when the war itself changes shape. Instead of more strikes, more escalation, more of the same pattern that had already cost billions and gotten nowhere, American officials opened secret talks in Switzerland. Quiet rooms, no cameras, and one detail that tells you everything about where things actually stood. Israel wasn't in the room. The country that started this fight got cut out of the negotiations to end it. You want to hear how thin that alliance had gotten? Listen to Trump describe his own relationship with Netanyahu. It's good, but we have to keep him a little bit sane. That's not the language of two allies working the same plan. That's the language of a superpower realizing it can no longer pay for its allies' wars. Washington needed the war over. Tel Aviv wanted to keep going. And when it comes down to a choice between an ally and the economy wins. Because economists were already using a word nobody wanted to hear out loud. Depression. Not a recession, not a rough quarter, a genuine 1930s level collapse if this war kept dragging past where it already was. That's the number sitting on the table in that room in Switzerland. Not troop counts, not casualty figures. A depression, weighed against a war Israel still wanted to fight. So the talks happened. A quiet ceasefire nobody wanted to call a surrender. But winding down a war doesn't undo what caused it. The secret meeting, the ally cut out of the room, the 4 weeks of oil reserves, none of that is the actual problem. That's just the symptom finally showing up where cameras could see it. Oil tankers started moving through the strait again, but the oil didn't go back to the way it was priced before. Quietly, deal by deal, barrels that had always been sold in dollars started getting priced in yuan, in rupees, in dirhams. Nothing dramatic, just enough to notice if you were looking for it. For 50 years, if you wanted to buy oil anywhere from anyone, you bought it in dollars. Didn't matter if you were French or Japanese or Nigerian. Oil was priced in dollars, which meant every country on earth had to hold dollars, stack them up, keep them on hand just to keep the lights on. And that single requirement did something no army ever could. It meant the dollar never had to compete with anything. It didn't have to be the best currency, it just had to be the only door in the building. That's what was underneath it all, the petrodollar. Could the empire still guarantee that oil only moved through its system? The answer to that question turned out to be no, and the empire's entire financial architecture was built on the belief that the answer was always yes. When the war ended, that belief ended with it. The fighting stopped, but the war had shown everyone something they couldn't unsee. The system was already breaking. Countries that spent years quietly annoyed with Washington finally had their reason to walk. Nations started building payment rails that didn't run through the dollar system at all. Deal by deal, country by country, the one door became one of several. And none of it, not the yuan deals, not the new payment rails, not the alternatives, would have mattered if America could have won the war in a week. But the 13 men who walked into Syria in 1984 built something you couldn't bomb away in a week. They built the time that let the alternatives mature. The toll booth is still sitting there on the highway, but nobody's stopping anymore. Not because the booth is gone, it's still standing, still looks the same as it always did, but the drivers figured out something the toll collector didn't want them to know. There are other roads now. They don't go through the same gate. They don't pay in the same currency, and the empire can't afford to block every single one of them. Like this video, share it with someone who follows geopolitics, and subscribe for more content like this. And to understand why the military system Iran spent 40 years building may be almost impossible to shut down, watch this next video.